Broadcast is live. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to Sugar and Silk, brought to you exclusively by Ace Podcast Nation. My name is Ben Doughty.
My name is Michael Olajide.
Well, Michael, by far the biggest story of the weekend is the news that Dillian Whyte failed a drug test conducted by VADA. His drug test returned an adverse finding. I don't know for what substance yet, incidentally. I don't believe it's been named. But it's resulted in the swift cancellation of his rematch with Anthony Joshua, which was scheduled for next week in London. What's interesting?
Was that a fight that was looked forward to in the first place?
You say, was it eagerly anticipated?
Yeah.
I think mixed feelings amongst the boxing fans. I mean, I don't know. You've always got these layers, you've got the hardcore, the committed fans, and the people who spend all their time all week on the internet discussing boxing with the likes of yourself and me. And you've got the people who are regarded as the casual audience, and the people in between. But I saw a lot of people on my page with a kind of so what attitude. Personally, I quite liked the fight. I thought it was relevant as a rematch because they fought back in 2015, as you all know, when they were both kind of up and comers to a great extent.
Mm-hmm.
And Joshua won that fight, pretty convincingly, really. But they've both been through their trials and tribulations since then. They both needed, a high-profile victory. And I thought, with the traditional rivalry between them, they fought one time in the amateurs too, and then Dillian Whyte won on that occasion. I thought it was a reasonably sort of, interesting rematch. It wasn't, it was the sort of thing that you could make a case for either guy. It had that kind of charisma to it, the rivalry they've got. So I wasn't down on the fight, but I did see a lot of people slamming it. I don't know what your perception of it was, but what's interesting. Eddie Hearn and people have picked him up on this. When Conor Benn got the adverse finding, basically the news that he'd failed one drug test at the time, it turned out to be two, which led to people, initially they tried to hold their ground. They had the public workout. Even at the final press conference, I think they were still saying they may try to press ahead with the fight, despite the Boxing Board of Controls saying they were vetoing the fight and they weren't going to sanction the fight. Now, when Eddie Hearn was on TalkSport with a kind of shock jock type guy called Simon Jordan, who's made a bit of a splash over here because he's controversial and he really grills people like Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn said, we contractually could not have cancelled the fight. We couldn't have done that. So now that they pulled this one immediately, people are saying, well, so contractually you can cancel a fight when an adverse finding is returned. So what were you talking about?
Yeah, that kind of, I mean, that's out of my jurisdiction. I don't know much about that stuff, but to me, the fight, I don't know. It didn't really have anything about it because Dillian Whyte, the last fight he had was with Tyson Fury, right?
No, he's had one fight since then against Jermaine Franklin. They both fought the same guy last time out, which added to some of the kind of yardstick,
Oh, that kid, yeah,
somebody big, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I wasn't. It's not enticing to me. There's nothing very much that I don't look at it as an attractive fight. I know both guys are heavyweights, and there's a little bit of interest in seeing exactly how the kids, Anthony Joshua, is making progress. I think that's kind of interesting to see. Like, have they put any new weapons into the cachet? That I'm kind of interested in.
But regardless, we have a more pivotal story now in terms of the drug issue in boxing. Just to bring people up to speed, I know a lot of people know this already, but some people might not know. Dillian was banned in 2012 after his 9th professional fight because he tested positive for a banned substance, which honestly I cannot pronounce. It's got about 28 letters in it. It sounds a bit like methylelexamine or something like that, okay? But he tested positive for that anyway, and you're not allowed to take it, so don't let me catch you trying it. I do wonder how you managed to look that good at 60 years old still. The jury is still out, to be honest with you, Silk, but at the end of the day, you're not hurting anybody, so it's up to you what you do. But listen, no, so he failed that drug test back in 2012, and he was banned by UKAD. I believe it was a UKAD-conducted test at the time. And he blamed it on the use of a controversial and since discontinued pre-workout over-the-counter supplement called Jack 3D. Now the thing is, he that drink sounded like it was a little bit kind of spicy and should never have been legal in the first place or commonly available.
Mm-hmm.
But the distinction I would make is that just because that was the way he accounted for the the ingestion of the substance in his system, it doesn't mean necessarily he could have, of course, been advised that was the best thing to say. Tell him you took Jack 3D because you know what, that's crazy gear. Mm-hmm. The point I'm making, it's not about not believing Dillian. It's about retaining a healthy degree of skepticism, right? Because everybody, I've seen loads of people say, when they were talking about Conor Benn, they were saying, oh, damn, Dillian Whyte got done for a sports, pre-workout drink. No, that is not in the realm of fact. That was his alibi, and nobody at UCAD, took any notice of his alibi at the time, because what they said was he had not demonstrated that he was not significantly at fault, and because he was not a big commercial animal at that time after 9 pro fights, because Dillian Whyte came up the hard way without an Olympic medal, without the gloss of all of that, he wasn't with Matchroom, early doors. So he wasn't a big commercial animal. So they banned him like they always do to fighters who don't have that kind of backup, right? And he got a 2-year ban. He was pretty smart about it because he used that 2 years to hire himself out as a sparring partner, and he sparred with the Klitschko's and
okay, Ben. Such. So let me ask you something. If I can interrupt, I'm sorry.
Go on.
What would you do if you were head of UKAD or whatever they call it? What would you do, given what you know of Dillian Whyte, his history, as well as what he just tested? What would you do?
Well, we don't. Here's the thing: we don't know what he's tested positive for this time. To bring people up to speed with the, with the history, okay.
They canceled the fight, so obviously it's something illegal. He tested for something.
Inevitably, he's returned an adverse finding. But just to bring the things up to date, 7 years he got. He returned in 2014 after that 2-year ban. Okay. And then he rose to stardom, and you know the rest. And then in 2019, ahead of his fight with Oscar Rivas at the O2 in London, there was an adverse finding. He tested positive basically for Dianabol, and I believe it was I think it was a UCAD test. I think VADA tests he passed.
And what are the chances? And what are the chances? Do you think the chances that the fights that he won in between that he wasn't using as well? What are the chances of that? He just wasn't caught.
Well, exactly, because I was talking to a friend of mine called Peter McDonough, who's quite vocal on all matters boxing and had an interesting career himself. And he said, when people juice, they keep doing it. That was his view. He says, when cheats continue to cheat, they just look for other ways of circumventing the process. But the thing is, right, okay, Dillian failed that test for Dianabol, but it was brushed under the carpet. It was not announced publicly. They told Rivas and they told White's team, but both sides opted to go ahead with the. You know what? They didn't tell Rivas. That's the whole point. They told White's team. They didn't tell Rivas' team. They went ahead with the fight somehow. Mm-hmm. And then after that, there was a big drawn-out process where 6 months later, Whyte was exonerated because UCAD concluded that the trace levels were so extremely low that were found in his system that it was very unlikely he'd done it deliberately or to gain an unfair advantage. So that, he dodged a bullet on that occasion. And I don't think it's any coincidence that he got that result when he was a big commercial animal, when he didn't get any special consideration, when he wasn't a big commercial animal. Fast forward to this weekend, I found it just yesterday. I was just scrolling through Instagram and I saw official statement from Matchroom saying we've cancelled the fight. Dillian Whyte's VADA test has returned an adverse finding. And, they didn't say what it was. And they still haven't said what it was. But what they are doing, they're not looking to cancel the show. They're looking to find Anthony Joshua a replacement opponent. They've been talking about Hasim Rahman Jr. George Foreman III even threw his hat into the ring a couple of hours ago on social media. But most people you see, Michael, think that Derek Chisora, who was scheduled to fight Gerald Washington on the same card, the whole buzz in British boxing is that Derek Chisora will be offered the fight now. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah. First, to go back to what you were saying about the Dianabol or whatever the thing it's called. I remember when Pryor fought Arguello, and you remember that too, yeah. and he tested. I don't know. There was something in the water. It was right. The controversy about the water. What was in the bottle?
He never tested positive prior.
All it was positive for anything. But he did have something, obviously Panama Lewis said, no, the one I mix.
Yeah.
Now there may be something extremely natural that the only thing is you're only allowed to have water in the corner. That's it.
So you don't mix anything.
Not even orange juice, not even a grape spritzer. You can't have anything else except for water. So as soon as you put something else mix something else into the water or into the fight, right away the fight has to be. And I love Aaron Pryor with a passion, and I love Alexa Aguayo as well. But you need to come down on it and say this is either a no contest or Aaron Pryor is disqualified and the fight goes to Arguello. One or two. There's no third option. There's no other. There's no. For a fact that he had something else in that water other than.
Well, you don't know for a fact, but it sounds very, very likely, because how can you mix water with water? So if you mixed a bottle, then you must have mixed it with something else.
Yeah,
to be honest with you, I think he's an over.
We don't know what it is. We don't know what it was, but we're not idiots.
I don't believe that's why Aguayo lost the fight. I don't believe that's why Pryor won. When people say, "Oh, that victory's tainted," I don't think it is. I'm not
saying it's why he won either. But the thing is, it made a difference. And when it makes a difference, you don't know. You know what? Aaron Pryor was able to step up he was able to elevate his pace, and he's probably able to do that anyway. But you don't know. And if he's not able to elevate that pace to the level he did when he stopped Arguello, then maybe Arguello doesn't wilt in the later rounds, in the 14th, 13th, 14th round. Maybe he doesn't wilt, and maybe he comes back stronger. And he finally. There's just so many intangibles. You can't now. It's like you're throwing the fight up in the air and you're making all sorts of.
I think it's the reason why people thought it was so pivotal was because he asked for that bottle literally before the conclusive round. But what I would say is I agree with you. If there's been a breach of the rules, which clearly verbal evidence strongly indicates was a breach of the rules, I'm okay with your suggestion that that's a no contest or a disqualification. Yeah. I don't happen to believe it's why Pryor won the fight. I actually think Pryor won fair and square. But I agree with you. I'm not disputing. I'm not disputing your logic on that. Do you know what Luis Resto said it was?
Sorry?
Say again?
I said you can't say fair and square. It wasn't fair and it wasn't square. But he won that fight because people didn't believe it would make a difference. But little things do. Like sometimes all you have to do is just make a mistake and bring your hand back down low and you get hit. And that's the end of the fight. You know what I mean? There's so many other ways to end it. I just don't think that should be a blemish on Arguello's record. And even posthumously, they should reverse that decision. Absolutely.
Maybe. I mean, certainly the rematch was certainly conclusive enough, wasn't it? But do you know what Luis Resto said? Do you know what Luis Resto said that Panama Lewis would give to fighters in the corner? The bottles he mixed. You know what he said it was? Yeah, he said it was crushed up. Say again?
Crushed up Alka-Seltzer or something? I don't know.
No, crushed. No, it was crushed up asthma tablets, which is basically salbutamol or Ventolin, which obviously the whole thing when you take a blast of a Ventolin inhaler, it opens up your airways, which obviously people do it because their airways are compromised usually. But I heard that athletes will abuse Ventolin sometimes, or track athletes used to do that because it gave them a bit of more of an anaerobic threshold, right? Okay.
There you go.
So that was what Resto said that Panama Lewis would do. We get you in the corner sometimes. It would have crushed up salbutamol in it, which gave you like a surge of energy, which did look like that's what.
And look, and this guy was beyond more than just that. Obviously, see what happened with Billy Collins. It probably happened with a lot of his other fighters. He gave them, he gave them substance that helped them come to win a fight. And I don't know. It just is not good for boxing. It's not good for Arguello's record, and it's not good for Aaron Pryor. It's not a good look. Aaron Pryor is a great athlete, incredible fighter. He didn't need it, but he used it, and that should be brought up. And I think that should be rectified posthumously, whatever it is. The Arguello family, I think, would appreciate it.
But it's interesting because I don't remember when you think of how rife the drugs issue is in boxing today, and how every several weeks a high-profile fighter seems to fail a test or get flagged for a banned substance by either VADA or UCAD ordinarily. I don't remember it being a thing in the 1980s at all, really, to be honest with you, or even hardly in the 1990s. I do remember Livingston Bramble testing positive for ephedrine after he beat Raymond City the second time, and he blamed that, and I don't really doubt him. He said it was he took some anti-cold medication, which, to be honest with you, he probably did. And because back then it didn't. Did you ever hear about PEDs or juicing or anything like that in your career? Did anybody do it?
I did. I did hear about it, and the thing is, it really came to light. I would say in the 70s, but it was in the amateurs, and the thought was the Eastern European fighters were doing a lot of it, and then from the Eastern European amateur fighters, it transferred over into the pro game, and anybody could get it or do it at that point. So was it in the pro game in the 80s? We didn't. I don't think anybody thought it was, so they didn't measure for it. They didn't check for it. There weren't any. You know what I mean?
No, they did urine tests, didn't they?
Sorry.
They did urine tests, but it seemed to be all it ever seemed to do was busted fighters.
Right? You have to test for a specific thing. You'd have to test for a specific thing, like you have a urine test, and so if you have a Russian or Eastern European drug in your urine, you'd have to know what that drug is. You'd have to test for that drug to know if it's there or not.
Well, all I remember in that era was guys like Tim Witherspoon getting testing positive for weed, or Hector Camacho testing positive for cocaine, and getting little suspensions because they were bringing the game into disrepute. They were obviously not performance enhancers, you know. And that's the only kind of drug test stories I remember, certainly in the 1980s, you know. But
it was only a matter before it was only a matter of time before it would seep into the pro game. But from what I understand, I remember clear as a bell that it was a controversy with the Eastern European athletes, and it just kind of like seeped over into the amateur and pro game.
People think it started in Eastern Europe, don't they? And they think it started at that kind of Olympic level. And certainly, I think in the 1970s is when it seemed to go into overdrive in athletics, because it was definitely a thing in the 1980s in athletics, you know, the Ben Johnson scandal and all the rest of it, you know. But see, the trouble, if you look at the heavyweight division, for instance, this is Dillian Whyte's third red flag. Right? He's had one ban, he was exonerated the other time, and then this time we don't know what's going to happen. Because the thing is, he said, you know, I would appreciate the chance to prove my innocence, just like I did last time. the previous time, Dylan, but not the time before that, all right? And he says, you know, and I'd appreciate, you know, not being subject to trial by media. But at what point do you say, like you intimated earlier, this is 3 times, what are we supposed to think? Do you know what? You're going to love this one. The best one I heard today, it was some guy on my page, was trying to suggest that this is all some kind of ruse and get-up, and White has been framed because AJ's people were trying to get out of the fight. He said, I didn't think this fight would go ahead. I knew they'd find some way out of it, and here it is now. That's pretty out there, isn't it? That's impressive amount of spin, yes?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure that Anthony Joshua has any particular reason to fear him, Dillian Whyte. So, you know, I mean, obviously...
So you're not entertaining the idea. You're not entertaining the idea that they deliberately frame Whyte somehow with the complicity of VADA, presumably.
But who would frame him?
To get out of the fight with a guy who's already beaten, no? You're not feeling that one.
No, I'm not feeling it. And who's framing him anyway? Like they're saying...
It's ridiculous. What I'm doing is I'm having my moment, because, you know, what's annoying is going back and forth with people with comments, and they keep coming back with something, and you see they've tagged your name again, and you're like, here we go again. This is my show and your show. I get to talk now and say, you're talking bollocks, Christopher Carter. Sorry, you're a nice guy, but you are talking bollocks. And the Silk thinks so too, even though he'd never say something as profane as that. My man agrees with me. That's the end of it. That's all I'm doing. I'm just giving him enough rope.
And never mind the bollocks. What was that? That album was Pistols?
Sex Pistols, yeah. That's what I like about doing this show with you. We veer off into kind of other cultural areas. Like we had Vivienne Westwood, who obviously had that punk rock connection as well. Never Mind the Bollocks was the title of the Sex Pistols only album, not just the first album.
Yeah, their only. That's amazing. They made such an incredible impact for one album. That's insane.
They did, and you know what? Hardly anybody saw them play. To be honest, with the original lineup in this 1977, 76, 77, 78, because a lot of their gigs across the UK got cancelled because of all the anti-feeling towards them.
And was McLaren, was he a part of that group, and Billy Idol as well?
Nah, Billy Idol was in a band called Generation X.
But
Malcolm McLaren was the Svengoolie and the manager who kind of put it together.
Yeah.
People think he takes outrageous credit for having conceptualized the whole thing. John Lydon certainly says he was shooting in the dark like the rest of us, but he makes out he was some kind of mastermind retrospectively. But people do that, Dennis Rappaport says...
Ben, you have to say that he was creative. He was like incredible. He even crossed over into like hip hop in the 80s and made big hits there, like Madam Butterfly and everything. He was incredible.
Yeah. Oh, he was certainly a highly intelligent, talented, creative person, no doubt. But whether he invented punk rock or not, that is a little bit more of a bigger call. At the risk of alienating our audience at this point, I would sometimes, sometimes I would like to branch out like Joe Rogan and see if we can, just talk about anything that comes into our goddamn heads. But Dennis Rappaport says in the 80s they used Jorabolin, but no one really knew what it was. Some doctors used to say it was a vitamin boost, when in fact it was a steroid. So that's an interesting contribution.
Yeah. And Dennis would know, highly knowledgeable man. I tell you, I'm 100% belief in what he says.
By the way, Christopher Carter, who I was talking to then, ranting at, he's watching, so he says, I'm not having it, and if you want a relevant song title, the drugs don't work. The thing is, Michael, like I say, at what point, what view do we take of this? Because if you look at the heavyweight division, I can go through a lot of names that have been flagged, of failed drug tests in the last 10 years. You've got Dillian Whyte, who's obviously in the eye of the storm right now. Tyson Fury, the nandrolone thing, which was never fully resolved. It was something that, in the end, his ban was kind of backdated with time served, because he pretty much sat out that time anyway, because he was having all kinds of emotional problems and all the rest of it. You have Jarrell Miller. Well, he was supposed to fight Anthony Joshua one time and ended up giving Andy Ruiz the opportunity of a lifetime.
Big Baby Miller, he was out for a year or two. Like, what happened with him? His was pretty significant.
Miller has been banned 3 times, I think, or failed 3 drug tests. He was basically a walking chemist, going into that Joshua fight that never was. But he's been busted since then, hasn't he? Didn't he get busted for something that was? He said he took it for sexual potency. It was called something King. Jarrell was also framed, says Christopher Carter, but I think he's joking. Do you know? I want to tell you something. I interviewed Miller once before he got busted. It was at the press conference for the Joshua fight to announce it, and he was staying in the Scion Park Lane in Hilton. And one thing I noticed was his eating habits were definitely not right. The fight was still several weeks out, but he was eating a lot of junk for a guy that's getting ready for a fight. Burgers and fries and stuff. But maybe if you're taking all that, if you're taking gear and stuff, you just burn all that stuff up. Maybe, but
you do. But he was never the body beautiful anyway, right? When you looked at him, that's why they call him Big Baby. He had no muscle definition. The dude was
no, he didn't. No, he certainly didn't. But so Miller's another one. Povetkin is another name. Luis Ortiz is another name who received a ban or failed a drug test. If you go through the heavyweight division, you'll see that actually there are probably more names that have been flagged than haven't. So what my problem is if Conor Bennett apparently has been cleared, I mean, even though that still seems a little bit murky and there's not been any scientific explanation to attached to his alleged clearance. But my thing is, what's the point in having these drug tests at all? If you're going to exonerate guys constantly and say, well, it was low levels or it was all an accident, at what point are we going to have a hardline approach? And do we definitely need one?
Yeah, I think we absolutely do. We can't allow the sport to just dip off into doing. It can't be a free for all. I mean, it's unfair. There's some fighters that just, on principle, won't do that, and it doesn't mean they should be at. They shouldn't be at odds, or they shouldn't have to contemplate having to do it in order to compete. But here's the thing I'd like to say: what's more effective, like a drug, or like increase your skills, man. Like that's what it's that's what it's saying. Why are you taking drugs when you should be increasing your skills? You're gonna what? You're gonna live. I mean, I know what the drugs are used for. You're gonna be able to, last your endurance. Maybe even your power is more. You know what I mean? Is more effective. I don't know, but without a doubt, they should absolutely. You know.
I mean, one of the things it seems to be a factor, Michael, is that they say that some of these guys take this stuff to allow them to train at an inhuman pace with consistency and injury free, so they're able to train harder than the next guy, and then that makes a big difference, right? Even if
Yeah.
it doesn't give you, even if it doesn't imbue you with any physical gifts over and above the ones you had anyway, if you can train much harder than the other guy or significantly harder than the other guy, fights are won in the gym, right? So that is a big deal. Weight making is another thing, obviously not in the heavyweight division, but some people have taken it to make weights they perhaps couldn't make if they didn't take banned substances. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I remember when Conor Benn, the day Conor Benn, the news broke that Conor Benn had failed a drug test for clomiphene, and we knew what it was on that occasion. A former world champion of my acquaintance phoned me up and wanted to know what I'd heard, and what was the latest. And this guy had his own little problem with a failed drug test as well. He was never actually banned, but he did end up losing a world title because of it. I think some people would know who I mean by saying that. And I said to him, do you think that Ben is innocent or clean? This was literally on the day it happened. And he paused for a second and he said, probably not, but they're all on it. And that was somebody, he's obviously very much in the know, very much in the scene. At the top level, and he was of the opinion they're all on it. Huh?
I don't know that they're all on it. I would refuse to believe that. Maybe it's like a 50-50. I don't know, 70-30, but I don't think everyone's on it. I mean, I think there are some people, they couldn't even afford it. Never mind. You know what I mean? Maybe it's something when you get to like you're about to fight for a title or something, you can afford it. But I'm sure those treatments and the whole thing is an expensive. That's one of the upsides of boxing, I guess. You don't, and not until you fight for a title can you afford to do steroid treatments.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, when some people say they should just legalize it all, that argument when they say, then there'll be a level playing field. But you just highlighted the reason why there wouldn't be a level playing field, as well as that being a pretty insane principle to begin with. It wouldn't be a level playing field, would it? Because, like you say, performance-enhancing drugs cost money. But, VADA testing costs a lot of money, Michael. You know that. I think it costs about 30 grand.
Wow.
VADA testing. And Dillian Whyte's whole thing is, why on earth would I do this? He said, I paid, a lot of money at my own expense to have VADA testing like I have done for all my fights, etc., etc. And so consequently, why would I do this? But what I'm encouraged to believe by people who know more about this than I do is that these guys who do this, it's about cycles and it's about timing and it's about knowing how to circumvent the testing procedures. And sometimes they can really, sometimes they can't,
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously it's just unfair. I think when you're on steroids and another guy isn't, and even if he was, you hit harder, you hit stronger, you hit longer, all those things. So that person's brain is your physical health or your life is on the line at this point. You can hit a man a lot harder than you could naturally. I mean, you're shortening his ability to earn and to win. You know what I mean? And it's just unfair. You need levels of expectancy and levels of you just, hey, listen, you have to have parameters on this, and it's not like you can punch and then you can kick every once in a while. It's like, no, you cannot do drugs because these things are taking you into a realm where you would never usually be or be able to get to, and the other man has a life he has to live as well. It's why not just put metal, like brass knuckles, in your gloves then and start going at it? It's a free for all at that point.
Sure. So would you be? I want to talk about Anthony Joshua and where he goes in the very short term from here in a second. But as far as Whyte goes, he's out of the fight. That is that, and now he's got another battle on to try and clear his name. Would you be rather sceptical that he is completely whiter than white, if you'll forgive the pun at this point? Would that be your take on it without intricately knowing the details?
So you're saying, would I be okay with him?
No, I'm saying, would you be skeptical that he's innocent? Do you tend to think, oh, this might just be all a mistake, and
Yeah.
hopefully he gets it straightened out, or are you more of the view it's highly likely that there's skullduggery involved because this has happened
Yeah,
too often?
I guess it's my nature. As soon as you're flagged, you know what I mean, for something,
But
and they're an official, like they're an official. It's not just hearsay. It's an official body, government body of boxing or whatever that measures whether the man is honored or not. Why would you get a false? Why would you get a false reading? It doesn't make any sense to me. That's what they're there to do, and it's a particular drug that isn't. You can't naturally get it, right? It isn't in anything that.
Well, here's the thing. Can anybody who's watching this show right now, can anybody tell me what this substance is that Dillian Whyte has tested positive for? Because I've not seen it anywhere in the media, and I don't believe it's been made public knowledge yet, but I'm open to be contradicted. Can anybody, any of our viewers tonight, tell us if you know what the substance is? Because the clomiphene thing came out immediately with Conor Benn. With Whyte, with Dillian the last time back in 2019, I think that the Diana thing was revealed reasonably quickly. Big Baby Miller's thing was something that was called G816984 or something, sort of thing no one's ever heard of. But can anybody tell me the substance we are talking about in relation to Whyte? In the meantime,
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question in the meantime, actually, unrelated to this. Who are your top 3 pound for pound boxers today?
today,
Yeah.
I don't really entertain the concept of
Okay.
pound for pound lists.
Okay.
But
So who are your best? Who are the 3 best fighters? Do you think?
I think Inoue, Crawford, and maybe Gervonta Davis. In terms of, see, Canelo has more of a body of work than Gervonta Davis, if that's what you're basing it on. But in terms of who are the livest dogs at the minute, who really who exhibit a better mastery of the art than anybody else in the world, I would say it probably is Inoue,
And why Inoue?
Crawford, and Davis.
Why would you pick Inoue?
We spoke about it last week. We're going over old ground. I suppose
Did we
you
really?
said
Because
you said what's so special about him, and I gave you about 8 things, and you went, yeah, okay, that, and then that, and then that.
no,
Okay.
no, that didn't happen. You'd have to show me you have to show me. You have to put it on rewind.
Do you remember I gave you the Monty Python analogy when they said, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" And they said, "Well, they've got they get the excellent roads, the education system, the public health, and they kept saying, yeah, all right, well, they did that." And then, it was quite funny, but no, Inoue, I mean, Inoue is a fantastic fighter. He's obviously a phenomenal puncher. He's so accurate. He's a great counter puncher. He's got brilliant time. He reminds me of Donald Curry, but even a little more lethal, And he's certainly been on more of a kind of several weights massacre kind of run than Donald Curry ever did.
My top 3 are Crawford, Davis, and Usyk. Actually,
Usyk was the other guy that I would. If I hadn't have said Davis, I would have said Usyk. But Inoue and Crawford are definitely the 2. And then to me, it's Usyk and Davis would have to fight it out, metaphorically.
Yeah, I'm not. Again, I'm not sold on Inoue, and I'm obviously for the reasons that you may remember that I said last week. But he's a big puncher, and I understand that. But the best fighters in the world are fighters that are unpredictable. His power is fight changing. I absolutely understand that. It's like it's the gorilla in the room, right? Anytime the guy comes into the room, this guy steps into the ring, he could turn the lights out.
But he's also very smart. He's also very smart, and he's also very accurate, and he picks. Is so offensively intelligent as well. That finish of the jab to the body, the right hand to the head, and then the delayed left hook when he saw that Fulton wasn't going down from the right hand entirely. I think he's a very smart fighter, and I think he's got a lot of gears. I think listen. I mean, Usyk is Alexander Usyk a better pure boxer than Inoue? Yeah, I would say so. But when you take all the aspects into account, But the thing is, I don't suppose it really matters. I always think who is the best fighter in the world. Like, remember when in KO magazine they used to have that poll every year,
Yeah.
and you'd see it was a tie between Hagler and Leonard, Chavez, or whatever.
Mhm.
And that was what really mattered. You know, who is the number one guy at the minute?
Yeah.
And I believe it's Terence Crawford, but I can understand why some people might tip the other way and say that they prefer the Japanese kid.
Yeah. Well,
Or Alexander Usyk, because
anyway,
listen,
like the greatest fighters are unpredictable, and I believe in a way, from what I've seen so far, he seems very predictable. Like after you throw the right, you throw the left. It's just his power is just so overwhelming. But as he starts to move up and guys start getting bigger, maybe a
you
little
can't
bit
say that, Silk, because he's already moved up from light flyweight. He's at
flyweight
super
too.
bantamweight now. He's already gone on a run that you couldn't criticize him if he retired tomorrow.
No,
He's already proved you're wrong.
No, come on. We're talking about a difference of what, 8 pounds? Like from
No, we're not. No, we're
110,
talking 100.
108 to 119.
We're talking 100. No, we're talking 108 to 122, which is already a stone. That's like that. We're talking light flyweight, super flyweight, bantamweight, super bantamweight. That's 5 divisions. That makes a difference to those kids. When you get some guys at that weight, that is a lot, right? That's a lot of movement.
I don't know. I mean, once you're obviously it's not a lot of weight because it's not like his body is different because of it. Like when you see guys having to move up in weight in order to do things, like how Michael Spinks had to move up, how I don't know, James Toney, whatever, you see it markedly in their body. It's not something seen in his body because it isn't that significant. Like that jump
How
from
long have you been
bantamweight.
watching him for? How many fights of his have you seen?
I've seen one whole fight of his. I've seen
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of other, like his highlights, obviously, and I think he's exceptional. I do believe he's exceptional. I I um I think his power is like magnificent. He hits really hard. I think his punching, the way in which he punches, is predictable. And when I say predictable, I mean after he throws the right, he throws the left. After he throws the jab, he throws the right, or whatever it is. But if it's the left hand, the right hand comes afterwards. It's not a complex punching combination, is what I'm talking about. Like you see Roy Jones or Ali or Robinson or even Mike Tyson has got a much more complex combination puncher.
Donald Curry was a bit like that, right? Donald Curry, staples, basics, 1-1-2,
Yes,
1-2,
yeah,
left uppercut,
yeah.
right hand, left uppercut.
And his reflexes and power was what was able to guarantee him the win. His conditioning, his vision.
Yeah.
He saw punches coming at him. In a way, it's very much the same thing. Very
Yeah,
much.
that's what I'd say.
Yeah,
But
exactly. So what I'm saying is that predictability, like what it's one of the hardest things to do is to fight somebody with power and not know when that punch is coming. That more or less just.
I think Inoue is so fundamentally sound. I think perhaps he doesn't look spectacular to your kind of
No,
like.
no. Well, what did you say fundamentally sound? What do you mean? Because Roy Jones wasn't fundamentally sound, but he certainly was like incredible. So I'm willing to go the same way with Inoue, but show me something that I'm missing.
I think he makes it look very easy, you know what I mean? To the point where you might even think you're seeing something unremarkable. You see Roy Jones when he comes out and he throws a double left hook and a left uppercut, and that's his opening shot. Roy was outside the box. You once gave a wonderful description of Roy when you said you set somebody a hypothetical test. Say, you've got to play a bass drum with this foot while you're simultaneously doing whatever else you specified. And you said that try that for a second, and then you've got some small kind of empathy with the unusual brilliance of Roy Jones. But Inoue is not that guy. Like you said, everybody's got a different way to hunt. But Inoue has massacred 5 divisions right now. And what is interesting to me is people don't even think they would rule him out if he went up as far as maybe even 135 when he's currently only at super bantamweight. People certainly don't think there's anybody at bantamweight. Anybody at featherweight who could beat him either. And they'd expect him to go marauding through that as well. That is pretty special.
That's what the divisions do, though. The divisions, like one time the highlights are on the welterweights, lightweights, and there's nothing on the flyweights. There's nothing on the heavyweights. It's always been that. I think the '80s was probably the strongest time for all divisions. late 70s, early 80s, early to
Think
mid.
about the 80s. The 80s may not have been. Each division may not have been at its strongest ever in the 80s, but if you look at the depth of talent across all divisions in the 80s, I think it was the deepest decade ever. Montel Griffin, who will have to get on the show sometime, he insists it's the 90s, but he insists a lot of stuff. I believe the 90s was great, but the 80s was better and deeper. It really was. And I will have that argument with anybody. Obviously, I don't need to have it with you. But if you look at the sheer depth of talent and the stars and legends and great fighters of the 80s that were active in the 80s and in the heyday in the 80s, I think I don't think anything else quite competes with it. Not the 90s, not the 20s, not the 50s, all the rest of it. But if we can, I want to talk, you mentioned Montel Griffin. There's someone else I wanted to mention about him a bit later I wanted to discuss. But going back to Anthony Joshua for a second, he's looking for a substitute, okay? Right? It's an interesting situation because I saw Rick Glazer on Twitter earlier saying nobody who should be fighting Anthony Joshua is going to take the fight at that kind of short notice now. People have said that it's, that Hasim Rahman might be up for it. The Chisora is the one. See, here's the thing, Michael, right? David Hay gave an interview with Seconds Out with Radio Raheem yesterday. And Hay told Radio Raheem that he said, Derek told me a week ago that Whyte was going to fail a drug test or had failed a drug test and that he would be fighting AJ instead. He said that's the fight he's been training for. He thinks he's fighting AJ. He said, I didn't pay much mind to it at first, but that's what he told me, that exactly this would happen. Now, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt because it comes from David Hay and he does say some funny things. But people are talking Chisora may wind up getting that fight. You know what else? Flip Hrgovic and Dempsey McKean, the Australian heavyweight, they're due to fight each other on the undercard. Inevitably, their names have been thrown into the hat too, that one of those two might get the fight. But he's looking. Andy Ruiz has thrown his hat into the ring saying we need to do this trilogy thing. Everybody, wants a piece of him. Do you have any thoughts on the substitute?
Andy Ruiz would do that. Andy Ruiz would do that with only 1 week.
He says he will. He was asking for the fight.
Wow. It wouldn't make good managerial sense to me when he's 1 for 1 and he could, it's a money fight for him down the road. And isn't he supposed to fight the other kid, the puncher?
Deontay Wilder, yeah. But that seems to be an ever marinating fight. It doesn't ever seem to be happening. But I'm guessing because I was going to. Sugar and Silk will be branching out into press conferences and having a YouTube presence soon, right? As you know.
Yes.
And I was going to go to the Joshua Whyte press conference next week, assuming that we got accreditation. It's been a while since I've applied for it. Now, what I'm expecting to hear tomorrow is whether there's going to be press conferences anyway, and hopefully we'll get news of a substitute opponent and who's going to step into the breach. Because assuming the card is still on, and we get accreditation, I'm still going to go to those press conferences. And you think pretty soon they will have to announce an opponent, But that's what I'm waiting on tomorrow.
And why wouldn't
do you have
the whole card?
Say again?
Why wouldn't they cancel the whole card?
Why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Because they've sold tickets and because other fighters are on the bill and because it's a pay-per-view show right now on DAZN. They want to come up. They need to come up with an opponent who still justifies the pay-per-view. It's not an easy situation, is it?
No, it's not. It's I'm sure, and that's why it makes sense for promoters, managers. Everyone's got to tighten up their game. Like I don't understand how a fighter, like if I'm the manager of these guys that are testing positive for this stuff, I'm talking to my fighter. I'm making sure that this isn't happening because I'm getting blackballed from a promoter. Like any promoter that uses him again, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense at all.
But Eddie Hearn stuck by Dillian Whyte last time, didn't he? Because he was one of Matchroom's favoured fighters. I don't know if he was signed to Matchroom as such. I remember Barry Hearn saying a few years ago that Dillian Whyte worked with Matchroom on a fight-by-fight contract. So, but he was one of Matchroom's favourites, Dillian Whyte, and he's always been very popular since he made a name for himself on this side of the water. So Eddie Hearn stuck with him, didn't he? He stuck with Conor Benn.
It always comes down to principle, though, doesn't it? like
Well,
ultimately it always comes down to principle and what your business practices are and fairness and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And nobody wants to, like, everyone talks the game, but when it comes time to it, and it's like, okay, well, I could use this guy, Dillian Whyte, I could use him in future fights, and so they forget about the things they did, and they all of a sudden just.
well, you talk about principle. When Baby Miller failed the way he did, so gratuitously, like almost rattled when he walked, he was so full of performance enhancers, it would seem, according to results. Eddie Hearn said it was disgraceful, and I don't know what's wrong with these people. And are you fucking kidding me? What a joker! And he also said VADA is the gold standard, so they can't be wrong. As soon as Conor Benn failed 2 VADA tests, he stuck by him. He said that this is definitely a mistake. This appears to be a mistake if he's innocent, as I believe he is. So his ethics completely changed, as they did with the Whyte thing. He said that they couldn't pull a fight contractually, they couldn't cancel a fight just because of an adverse finding, when they've done precisely that on this occasion. Eddie's a good talker, and I'm sure he would have his explanations for both of us if he were in this conversation. But the fact is that I think ethics are very interchangeable and very situational in boxing, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you need to have rules that override or those kinds people's ethics. You need to have a stipulated law, and you need to have it backed up. And maybe I don't know. You have VADA and you don't take their word for it, or you don't, like, they come up and they present proof that yes, this guy has done that, and you're trying to find some way around the rules and laws. It's like, a guy's got to suffer the consequences for the decision he made.
Yeah, and the way the normal procedure is you get a B sample. All they do is when you do a test, like a urine test or a blood test, they split it into 2. So they have one, the A sample and the B sample, and that exists as a bit of insurance, just in case there was any contamination with one of them. The chance of that twice is astronomical. Okay.
Yeah, because if I was going to say, because if it doesn't come back the way you want it, you're in trouble. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you have the right to have a B sample tested if you query the results of the A sample. That is, you have a right to do it. See, I had a fighter one time who failed a drug test. He was pretty notorious on this side of the water for failing a drug test and admitting that he did it. And then he later admitted to 12 other banned substances that he'd also taken at some point or other. His name was Larry Olajide. When he failed the drug test for EPO, this was before I was training him, but I knew him well, and I trained him as an amateur. He'd been at the wild card training with Freddie Roach, and he'd been working with Alex Ariza, who was working with Freddie at the time. Then he said he tested positive for EPO after a fight with Sam Sexton that he lost at the York Hall. Then he said to me he didn't do it, and he said he was getting the B sample tested. It cost £1,000, all right, to get the B sample tested. He paid £1,000 of his own money to get it tested, knowing he was guilty of sin. It came back dirty. Then he admitted to me, well, actually, sorry, I did take the EPO, to be totally honest with you. He also said it was, it came from Ariza as well. That's what he said, I don't know if we can get sued for that. He's been pretty quiet lately, Ariza, right? He's probably not even watching this. But then he got banned, yeah? But God knows, why would you get the B sample tested when you know you're guilty? But he still tried it just in case, just to leave no stone unturned, Yeah. But in the end, he got a ban for 4 years, and you know what he did? He grassed somebody else up, a Scottish fighter, for what it's worth. Not that it really matters if he was Scottish or anything else. And then they cut his ban in half, and they said, okay, you can come back after 2 years. And he came back in the end in that international heavyweight prize fighter that James Toney was in. I don't know if you remember that a few years ago. But the point being, it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's ridiculous that you get your ban commuted by putting someone else in it.
Yeah. What's interesting is, has there ever been anybody that's been on steroids and lost? Because that must be really embarrassing.
Well, Larry Olajide lost. I said he lost the fight that he got flagged for. He lost. I'm trying to think what happened. I think he lost on a stoppage, but it was like an injury stoppage. He was doing okay in the fight, but he wasn't winning. And then he lost. He lost then. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure we've had other examples of it where people have tested positive after they've lost a fight. You'll have to leave that with me and let me roll that one around a little bit. But as I say, Monday, tomorrow, we should certainly hear about the press conferences and the card going ahead. And you'd think that they would announce Joshua's opponent soon. Here's the thing. What
How
we'll
do you
see.
think, how do you think the ringside ticket holders, how do you think they feel when they get this?
They're
Like, do
probably
they get,
not too happy, are they?
yeah,
They're probably not. Because it's not what they paid for. They paid for the Whyte Joshua rematch. You've got Chisora on the card as well. Whether he ends up jumping into the main event or not, there's a few other, obviously fighters a note on the card. Although Hergovich for a start, okay, Dempsey McKean, but no, they wouldn't be. They wouldn't be. It's not ideal, is it? But the thing is, the interesting thing will be whether Chisora does indeed get this fight, because Hayes' conspiracy theory, or his allusion to the fact Derek told him a week ago that this would happen and he's fighting Joshua. If Chisora is offered the fight and takes it, that will look very interesting, those revelations. If it doesn't turn out to be Chisora, then obviously it will carry a lot less weight, and it will just be David Hay again. But
you know what? It's, Ben, is like everything in the world is like everything's turned into some sort of conspiracy. Something you can't get truth anywhere. Everything's a conspiracy. Like whether it's political, whether it's the news, whether it's what I mean. Like a fighter said something earlier that said like he was going to. Everyone's able to read into things that just aren't like. Truth doesn't exist anymore. It's crazy.
I think it's worse in this social media era as well, because that's when you get all these people talking back and forth all the time. And Scoop Malinovsky
never used to have a mic and justify, find some way to justify their thing to be truth.
Yeah, you will know Scoop Malinovsky, the crazy journo guy that we know and love. And Scoop, I mean, he seems like a good guy, but he's plugged into the moon, for God's sake. I mean, he believes the most outlandish things are going on. Everybody's ducking everybody, and everything is a ruse. And Al Heyman is actually in league with the with the Vogons who are trying to take over the earth.
Everything is PBS fault. Everything.
Say again.
Everything is PBS's fault.
Yeah, everything's Al Heyman's fault, and it's funny when people get this agenda when they just can't be objective. Yeah. Like they hate one fighter or they hate one particular promoter, and you will never get a word of sense. I mean, It's like my old mate John Doyle, who threw his toys out recently and left the page again for the umpteenth time. But he didn't like Lennox Lewis, so you would never get a word of sense out of him about Lennox Lewis. He's just always overrated. He wasn't even a top 15 heavyweight, and that's just nonsense, I mean, I wasn't a huge Lennox Lewis fan, but I think he's right up there as a top 5 heavyweight, all things considered.
I mean, look, Lennox is a problem for anybody. He has been beaten. He was knocked out a couple of times, but he's a problem for anybody because he has his power, his focus, his conditioning, his punch selection. He was smart. He was a smart fighter, and then there were some fighters that he, I mean, what he did with Evander Holyfield. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do they call it? A draw? Or they called it a draw, right?
But it was scandalous.
Yeah,
it was scandalous. Yeah. So, but you see what I mean? Some people, they have such personal feelings about people in boxing that you will never get any kind of arbitrary, down the middle sense. That's why I try not to be too emotional about too many fighters. And I think getting older helps, because the older we get, I feel, the less hero worship you're likely to fall prey to with a fighter. I've never had a hero that was younger than me, for a start. So the only heroes have already, preceded me. Mm-hmm. And I think the less emotional you are about most fighters, the easier it is to make an informed judgment, especially if you purport to have a card in the journalistic guild. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. When you look at people and how people end up being fans of fighters, not because they understand the skills and the abilities of the fighter. It's a personality-driven thing. It's like they like that individual because he appeals to you in a certain way, and it's not something that you could sort of like qualify. You know what I mean?
I think it's about a worldview, don't you? I always look at Ali and Frazier, okay? And I think whichever one you prefer, especially if you were around in the era at the time, which I wasn't really. I was only a year old when they fought the first time in '71. But obviously, I caught up with it retrospectively and got well versed in the whole phenomenon of the both of them, Ali in particular. But to me, I think whichever one you preferred, Michael, particularly if you lived through those fights in real time, I think it very much encapsulated your worldview. I don't know if you agree with that. So Ali and Fraser, it was so politically polarized, particularly in context of the era.
Yeah.
You were one thing or another, weren't you? Generally, I mean, they said that Fraser represented more kind of hard-working, blue-collar conservatism and not being flash and being about, no frills. Let's get this done. He was a proper tough man. If you wanted to politicize it further, people could say he represented the establishment, however reluctantly. Whereas Ali was the renegade. If you liked things that didn't fit into the computer, if you liked style and profile and a little bit of vanity, even a little bit of narcissism, and that kind of genius of a style that didn't make sense that he made work, and it was beautiful and it was extravagant, and he was so iridescent and charismatic. You were very much if you're a Fraser type, which I love Joe Fraser anyway, but I've never been a Joe Fraser type. I've always been an Ali type. Would you agree that was probably the most graphic example of how people's preferences of fighters and their worship of fighters, their choices they make, defines how they see the world and how they see themselves?
Yeah. Well, that whole controversy between Ali and Joe Fraser, I could never understand it because Joe is even like physically blacker than Muhammad, so it's not like
that's what Foreman said.
It's not like Joe is going to get any preferential treatment over Ali. You know what I mean? He was backed by Cloverley, and they were a conglomerate of white businessmen, and they wanted to see him win because he was their investment. Of course, they were they invested in Joe, but Joe was every single thing about Joe was he was a proud black man. You know what I mean? And
he was, and that was misrepresented by Ali because Ali depicted things the way it suited him, and he made obviously when he called Fraser an Uncle Tom, which obviously Fraser took an undying enmity to his grave over that, I believe. But there's a magazine, I've got it somewhere in my collection. It was Boxing Illustrated, I believe, and it said, "Is Joe Fraser a black champion in a white skin?" You wouldn't have a cover that insensitively worded today, but things were different back then, weren't they? And people are trying to accuse Fraser of representing that, which obviously he didn't represent that, and he grew up poorer than Ali did, dirt poor on a farm, in South Carolina. So but it was interesting because Ali. You couldn't play the black card against Ali, could you? Because he already had that on lock. You couldn't get him off that hill.
Listen, at that point, Ali represented being black in a different. We needed to see that kind of empowerment. We needed to see somebody stand up and aggressively be like, you know what I mean? This is the way my life is. This is how I'm living it. And the black Muslims or whatever, they strongly represented, the American black population. And this is how you've got to be. And this is how, socially, this is how we are. And we have to represent ourselves we have to be seen in a different way because the way we've been seen, we don't want to be seen like that anymore. That's not it. And so in terms of, there has to be that, and I understand that because when people fear you, they respect you. Not everybody, but you do need to show multiple sides, not just the ability to talk it out. Some people just don't understand conversation, and you need to physically put them in their place, or the threat of being hurt can help as well. Because when you're facing when you're under that kind of duress, you need to be able to, you need a break, basically. And the only way you can do that sometimes is by, the threat of physicality coming back at you. It's a great negotiation term. Like when a person feels pain, a lot of people, when they have the upper hand, right, they're like, and they'll keep beating you and they'll never get off you. They'll just keep beating you. But when the pain comes back, all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, let's talk about this. You know what I mean? And that was the social issue. That was part of what the black Muslims were. You have to be a threat, and you have to show people that, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? You are a physical threat, and you're going to be hurt as well as I'm going to be hurt. And then we can come, on par on the table. And Joe wasn't necessarily like that. Joe was his own man, and I can appreciate that. But he didn't face any less racism and
No.
bigotry and all that than anybody else. In fact, he probably got it just as bad, just as worse. He was relegated to living in certain areas and all that stuff.
Yeah, but so all right, that's the political side of it, and you place that in context very well. But in terms of the ring style, even I would say that
Yeah.
if you're an Ali guy or a Joe Frazier guy, that kind of defines the way you see the world and the way you see life, whether you're a boxer or not. Because if you prefer Frazier and you prefer the idea of that relentless left hooker, or you prefer the dancing master, that.
But Ali didn't even dance in those fights. But yeah, I think
he did in the second fight, Silk. He did in the second fight.
Well,
Yes,
yeah,
he did.
intermittently, not as much as he
But
would.
regardless, they were who they were for the entirety of their career.
Where they were, and
what
what it is if you take a look at them, and what I think is so amazing, the dichotomy of it all is that their fight styles, their physical fight styles, are their personalities. That's what's so beautiful. That's what's so beautiful about those three fights. When you look at Joe Frazier, you can see exactly who Joe Frazier is by how he fights. And the same thing with Ali. And Ali isn't like, there was nothing flimsy about Ali at all. Like his everything he did made perfect sense. His reflexes, the fact that he always be able to come back, right? When somebody was would punch at him or hit him with a barb, he'd be able to turn around and bring it right back at you as a counter puncher. But he could also initiate. That's Joe, his style, his personality. He was able to absorb a lot, and he absorbed a lot and was able to bring it back. There's just so many, like, it's so, to me, it's so interesting how when you have those kinds of personalities and it reflects the fight style.
And Serge Ali here says, oddly enough, Ray Leonard grew up wanting to be like Joe Frazier. Well, that is somewhat true. I don't know if he spent the whole time growing up wanting to be Frazier.
Frazier's left hook, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, he certainly had that, and a body attack, I would say. Because he had a wicked left hook to the body, Sugar Ray. But the reason you know that, Sarge, is because of the interview that I did with Sugar Ray Leonard back in 2012, when he never said that to many people I know, but he told it to me during that interview.
Yeah.
But what he said was, initially he wanted to, when he was 13 or 14 when he started, Joe was his favourite, and he was trying to emulate Joe. Sure. But he clicked into Ali pretty soon afterwards, and he kind of logged onto that, and then suddenly that was his focus. So I don't think it was his whole growing up years he was trying to emulate Joe Frazier. I think that was just initially was his favourite fight when he first put the gloves on, But
and what's not to love?
Say again.
And what's not to love about Joe Frazier? He's a legend. He's epic. That's a hardworking man. He's a man who sacrificed for his family. He's a man who's passionate about the fight. Like every time he stepped in the ring, he laid his life. Like, you were gonna have to kill him to beat him. How many times did you look at George Foreman? How many times did he get up? It's crazy.
6. But the thing is, it's crazy when you watch him get knocked down by Foreman those 6 times. A couple of times he gets knocked down, right?
Yeah.
And as he gets up, he bangs his gloves and walks towards Foreman again. Yeah. And anyone would think Joe had scored the knockdown, not George. Yeah. Literally, he went after him like someone who's just knocked somebody over.
Yes.
And it was just craziness, because that was what Ali says in his heavily ghosted autobiography. At the point when he knocked Foreman down, and Foreman didn't beat the count. See, this is a bit of artistic license, because he said, I looked at him on the canvas and I thought of Joe Frazier. He said Joe would never allow a man to count him out while there was still blood in his body. You know what? I don't want to go on too much longer because we've been nearly an hour and I'm also running out of battery and I don't trust this charger. But there was kind of a short count in the Rumble in the Jungle. Do you not agree? That was a short. Listen, Ali won the fight. It was tremendous. It's a masterpiece. I love it. And I'm an Ali man. But the count was a little brisk. It was a little brisk.
The knockout of George Foreman.
Yeah, it's a pretty quick count. Run it back if you doubt me.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. Never doubt.
It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hey, he's won the title back at 33.
Really?
Foreman was getting up and wanted to get up. I believe that. I think George didn't expect. He was dazed, obviously, but I think he felt like he knew where he was and wanted to have another go. Next thing he knows, it's over.
How much of it do you think he was dazed, and how much of it do you think he was fatigued?
Maybe equal measure. He was definitely hit with some good shots, wasn't he? It was with that flurry at the end.
Yeah.
Off the right hand, but yeah, obviously he was knackered. You know, I mean, he'd been working the way he'd been working, hadn't he? Was it hot in that stadium? I'm guessing it was.
Yeah, I mean, it had to be. I mean, it was an evening, but it's a tropical climate, and
it was like 4 a.m. in Zaire, wasn't it? In Kinshasa, it was like about 4 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah. So it's not going to.
I suppose it was
be blazing at that time. I don't think.
You know, but listen, Michael, I would never seek to deny Ali, one of the greatest victories in the whole annals of the sport. But honestly, it is a quick count. It is. I mean, George.
How much would they have afforded him? Like a second, 2 seconds? How much did it?
I'm going to run it back. I'm going to have a look at it when we get off this call. And but it was just pretty brisk. Honestly, it was brisk, but nobody cared because everybody was invested in the fantastic, upset that had taken place. My point of view is to say that Joe Frazier would have never laid down like that. I think that's a little bit unfair to George Foreman because he was getting up, and he didn't beat what was kind of a short count. I believe it was. Usually we talk about long counts, right? Like Dempsey Tony and Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas.
Yeah,
but nobody has ever really seemed to pick up on the fact. I mean, I think Foreman did complain it was a short count at the time. But by his own admission, he was looking for any excuse he could get at the time because he couldn't live with himself after getting knocked off the top like that. But
during the fight itself, when the fight ended, it didn't look to me like George wanted to continue.
Well, he certainly didn't complain. Supposedly he got back to the corner, and Sadler said to him, "You all right?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, well, forget about it. It's history now." That's what they said to each other.
That's good. Yeah. On
that note, that feels like a good denouement because I'm worried about the battery today and suddenly losing control and suddenly I was getting cut out. So hang around for a second and we can talk about this YouTube thing. But in the meantime, thank you for watching us again and for all your comments. The ones that I don't get to in the live show, I'll have a look later and I'll interact with you.
You know what, Ben? Let me just say, I caught so much flack as a kid growing up, and I used to come over when I'd talk to people. I'd be like, "And again," and I'd say again, and they say that's again, and they correct me again, not again. So it was very interesting hearing you say that. It brought flashbacks to when I was like 7, 8 years old. And they used to laugh at me in school at a game.
We've always been kindred spirits. And people used to laugh at you in school, but look at you now. You're actually working with me. So who's laughing now?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. Thank you as always. Thanks to Simon Willis of Ace Podcast Nation in absentee tonight for being the glue that holds us together. We'll be back next week. I'm going to be interested to see what happens tomorrow in the update on Anthony Joshua situation. Anything relevant, you'll hear it here first. In the meantime, be lucky, keep punching.